Hi, Claudia here. Welcome to part 2 of my Mycenaean priestess painting. If you want to watch me do the sketch, and if you want a mini lecture in history and archaeology, please check out the first video. There I'm explaining my thought process, why and how I decided to choose this subject, and I'm also talking about late Bronze Age Greece and its women. So, if you want to know who the lady in my painting might be, then follow the link in the right hand corner. I highly recommend you do so, but of course I do. It's my video after all. Let me start with mentioning that I was trying something I haven't done very often, or at least not recently. And that is putting down the shadows first, because I wanted to preserve the brightness of the blue that I planned on using in the shadow areas. The color I used is Cobalt Blue, PB28 by the way. I usually put down a thin layer of the base color first. In this case, this would have been a wash of the main skin color, and then add the shadows on top. But here, this might have made the blue muddy. In some places, where I didn't plan ahead as well as I should have, that did happen. And you can see that these areas don't have the same vibrancy. I'm definitely going to explore this technique more, and it also works if you use a more conventional shadow color instead of a contrasting shade. This sounds counterintuitive to how you're supposed to use watercolors, and if you lay down a thick layer of paint that is easy to lift, this might not work very well. But other than that, I think it's worth a try. If you remember the reference images I showed you in the last video, you will have noticed that I went with the color palettes seen in the old frescoes. For the jewelry, that would be gold, a warm red that probably represents carnelian, and blue for either lapis lazuli or faience. The carnelian probably came from the east, possibly coming all the way from modern-day India, passing through major Levantine ports like Ugarit or Byblos. I hesitate to call faience a substitute for lapis lazuli, as it had its own high value. However, for millennia, the only source for lapis lazuli that the Near East, Europe and North Africa had, lies in the modern-day province Badakhshan in eastern Afghanistan. The long distance the precious stone had to travel should tell you enough about how treasured it was, and both Mesopotamian and Egyptian texts emphasize its extraordinary value. Lapis lazuli can also be used as a pigment for paints. The extraction of the lazurite, the mineral that gives the stone its color, is a complicated process which was developed in the 6th century CE. Some brands still offer paints made with lapis lazuli. The prices are very high, however, and the color payoff is often unsatisfying. The good news is, in the 19th century, the synthetic alternative ultramarine blue was developed, and guess what color I used for the blue beads in my painting. I briefly mentioned that the beads could also be made from faience. Archaeological faience should not be confused with the ceramics that are manufactured in Faenza, Italy from the 16th century on. The faience found in Greece has a glazed surface and a soft, crumbly but uncolored core. There were also beads found made of glass paste, also called frit. This looks similar to faience but doesn't have a glazed surface and is colored throughout. Frit is not only a step in glass making, but also the basis for the pigments Egyptian blue and Egyptian green. Both colors can be traced back to the 3rd millennium BC, but despite the name, there's no definite evidence that it was developed first in Egypt. The blue pigment was also widely used in the Mycenaean and Minoan frescoes of the late Bronze Age. In other words, the ones I used as inspiration for this painting. And after that little excursion in minerals and pigments, I'm going to put on some music. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and that I see you again. Bye!
ψεύτικα τα λόγια τα μεγάλα μου τα πες με το πρώτο σου του γκάλα. Μα τώρα που ξυπνήψανε στα φίδια εσύ φοράς τεριά σου στολίδια και δεν θα γράσεις ποτέ σου μάνα μου Ελλάς που τα παιδιά σου σκλάβους ξεπουλάς. Τα λόγια τα μεγάλα μου τα πες με το πρώτο σου του γκάλα. Μα τότε που στη μόρα μου μιλούσα έχεις τη ταιριά σου τα ρούσα και στο περάζει με πήρες σκέφτης άμα μου Ελλάδα, Ελλάδα, μάνα το καημού. Στις ρένες το